What if I told you that one of the strangest nights of my life began like any other road trip evening? Dusty highways, tired eyes, and an old van filled with nothing but friends, laughter, and plans to camp beneath the stars. You'd probably think it was just another travel story. But what happened that night on a lonely stretch of road in the Nevada desert wasn't just strange. It was something that defied every law of reason, every explanation we tried to hold on to, and it left us wondering whether we had been chosen or simply unlucky enough to meet something not of this earth. There were five of us: me, my college roommate Daniel, his girlfriend Mia, her brother Chris, and a girl named Sarah who tagged along because she hated the city lights and wanted to see the desert sky. We were driving west from Utah into Nevada, chasing ghost towns and abandoned places, making a sort of urban exploration documentary with nothing but a secondhand camera and our phones. None of us believed in UFOs or aliens or government cover-ups, at least not until that night. The first sign that something was wrong came just after midnight. We had been driving for hours, a long, endless stretch of desert highway where the only light came from the stars and the dull glow of the dashboard. Suddenly, the radio, though we weren't even using it, crackled to life with static, sharp and loud, like someone twisting the dial on an old analog set. Daniel cursed and hit the power button, but the static kept going. Then, just as quickly as it had started, it cut off. We laughed it off, blamed the cheap wiring in the van, and kept driving, but I noticed Sarah staring out the window with a look that wasn't laughter. "What?" I asked her, and she whispered, "Did you see that?" I followed her gaze, and at first saw nothing, just desert darkness, until a light appeared above the horizon. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a plane. It moved differently, jerky, deliberate, almost like it was searching. The light shot upward, paused, and then zipped sideways in a perfect 90-degree angle. My brain tried to rationalize it, but my gut knew something was wrong. "Military," Chris muttered. "Has to be some Air Force experiment. We're close to Nevada, remember?" Maybe he was right, but the way the light moved, smooth, precise, and silent, didn't feel human. We pulled over not long after, just off a dirt road where the desert opened up into a flat plain, the kind of place you'd expect to find scorpions and rusted-out cars, not the extraordinary. We killed the headlights, shut off the engine, and stepped out into the dry night air. The sky above us was massive, filled with stars that looked sharper and brighter than anywhere else. But that one light, the one Sarah had pointed out, was still there, hovering, watching. Mia, trying to lighten the mood, said, "Well, this is it. This is where the aliens come and take us." We laughed, but the sound was nervous, hollow. Then the light began to move toward us. At first it was slow, almost cautious. Then, in an instant, it shot closer, growing brighter, sharper, and far too real to dismiss. At first we thought it was some kind of trick of the eyes, like how the desert heat makes you see things that aren't really there. But the light kept coming closer until it wasn't just a glow in the distance anymore. It had form, structure, edges too sharp to belong to anything natural. A perfect sphere of white-blue radiance pulsing like it was alive, and the silence around us was suffocating, so thick that even the insects and the dry wind seemed to vanish. I remembered Daniel whispering this. "Isn't real," but no one dared to laugh anymore, because we all felt it, the hum inside our bones, like the ground itself had begun to vibrate beneath our shoes. The sphere stopped above us, maybe 200 feet in the air, and as it hovered, lines of light began to ripple across its surface like veins, shifting in patterns that looked less like machine signals and more like language. Something was being communicated, though none of us could understand it. And yet, deep in my chest, I felt a pressure, like a thought not my own trying to push its way into me. Chris, always the skeptic, pulled out his phone to film, but the screen went black as soon as he lifted it. No power, no response, just dead. And at that exact moment, our van headlights flickered on by themselves, flared bright, then went out again with a faint pop like every fuse had blown. That's when Mia grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin and said, "It's choosing us." And before I could ask what she meant, the sphere split open. It didn't crack or shatter. It unfolded, like layers of light peeling back to reveal a darker center. And from that center poured a beam that wasn't like any beam I had ever seen in movies or photographs. It wasn't solid, wasn't even really light. More like a column of shifting particles that shimmered between visibility and invisibility, bending the night air like heat waves on asphalt. The beam touched the ground just 20 feet from where we stood, and suddenly the air grew heavy, electric, the kind of pressure before a thunderstorm, only magnified 100 times, and Sarah gasped because in that beam, shadows began to move. Shapes. Figures. At first they looked like distortions, like silhouettes made of smoke, but the longer we stared the clearer they became, until we realized they weren't smoke at all. They were beings. Thin, elongated, with limbs that seemed almost too long for their bodies, and heads that tilted in sharp, precise angles as if analyzing us. They didn't walk, they glided forward, their forms flickering between solid and translucent, as though reality itself couldn't quite contain them. Panic should have made us run, but none of us moved. It wasn't fear that froze us. It was something deeper, like our will had been intercepted, as if our own instincts had been overwritten by an intelligence far stronger. One of the beings raised a hand, or what looked like a hand, and suddenly, images flashed inside my head. Not pictures, but full sensory experiences. Burning skies, oceans that boiled, towering structures of crystal and metal under alien suns, and then the crushing silence of endless space, stars collapsing, worlds torn apart. It was like being shown history, but not human history, a memory from somewhere far away, a warning, or perhaps a test. I staggered, clutching my skull, and through the blur I saw that Daniel and Mia were doubled over too, their faces twisted as though the visions were burning into them. Chris dropped to his knees, covering his ears, screaming that he wanted it to stop, though there was no sound, only thought. Sarah, though, stood perfectly still, tears streaking down her face as she whispered something I couldn't hear, like she understood, like she had been waiting for this. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the vision stopped. The beings withdrew back into the beam, their forms dissolving into light, and the sphere above pulsed once, twice, and then contracted in on itself, shrinking smaller and smaller until it vanished with a sharp flicker, leaving nothing but the desert night and the faint smell of ozone hanging in the air. We stood there in stunned silence, our breaths ragged, the stars once again clear and unmoving above us. But nothing felt the same. The desert wasn't empty anymore, not after that. And in the stillness we all knew, without speaking, that we hadn't just witnessed something unexplainable, we had been marked by it. For a long moment we didn't move, each of us locked in our own silent orbit of shock, until Daniel finally broke the stillness by whispering, "We need to get out of here," his voice thin, shaking, not the confident tone of the guy who always laughed off ghost stories and conspiracy theories. And though his words made sense, our bodies felt heavier than stone, like some invisible residue clung to us, slowing every movement, every breath, as if part of that encounter still lingered in our bones. We stumbled back to the van, fumbling with the doors, praying the engine would turn over even though we knew every circuit had been fried. But when Daniel twisted the key, the van roared to life, too quickly, too smoothly, as if the thing we'd just seen had restored it, not broken it. And that alone was terrifying. The headlights cut across the desert, but they seemed weaker, dimmer, as though the night had swallowed some of their strength. We drove, none of us daring to speak, until Mia suddenly gasped and pointed out the rear window. The light was back, not above us now, but following, hovering low and silent like a predator shadowing its prey. Daniel floored the accelerator, but no matter how fast we went, the light kept pace, gliding effortlessly over rocks and sand, always the same distance away. Chris cursed under his breath, pounding the dashboard, and then screamed at the night, "What do you want from us?" And that's when the answer came, not in sound but inside our heads, a single thought that belonged to all of us at once. "You already know." I nearly drove my nails into my palms hearing it, because the voice wasn't alien in tone. It was our own voices, layered together, male and female, old and young, as though it had taken pieces of us to speak back. The van jolted as Daniel swerved, nearly losing control, and then, without warning, the desert disappeared. I don't mean we blacked out. I mean one instant we were on a highway surrounded by scrub and sand, and the next we were somewhere else entirely, a place so vast and strange it stole the breath from my lungs. A cavern of light, endless and weightless, the van suspended in nothingness, no ground beneath us, only shifting currents of color that moved like water yet burned like fire. We weren't in control anymore. Seatbelts unbuckled themselves, doors opened without hands. An invisible pressure lifted us out of the vehicle like children being carried by unseen arms. I wanted to scream, to resist, but my body betrayed me. Paralyzed, weightless, helpless. The others floated beside me, their faces pale with terror, except Sarah. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't afraid. She reached forward like she was greeting them. And then they came. Not silhouettes this time, not flickering shapes, but beings fully formed, towering and impossibly graceful. Their skin a shifting silver that reflected the currents of light around us. Their eyes black pools so deep it felt like falling into eternity. They circled us, their movements synchronized, deliberate, and again the flood of vision struck, but sharper this time, like direct downloads piercing through thought itself. Planets breaking apart, machines larger than mountains harvesting suns, cities dissolving into dust as vast ships drifted above them. My chest burned as if my heart couldn't contain what they were showing me. But in the middle of that storm of alien images, I felt something personal. My childhood home, my mother's face, Daniel's laughter on the first day of college, and then the voice again, echoing inside us all. You belong to more than this world. Mia screamed, shaking her head violently, tears flying into the void, while Chris shouted curses that dissolved into sobs. But Sarah whispered, "Yes, I understand." And her body began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, until she seemed almost like them. We tried to call her name, to reach for her, but our arms moved like they were buried in tar. One of the beings extended a long, gleaming hand and touched Sarah's forehead, and in that instant her scream ripped through the void. Not a scream of pain, but of transformation, of something tearing free inside her. And then she went silent, her body slack, drifting, her eyes wide open but not human anymore, reflecting that same endless black depth we saw in them. My stomach turned cold with the realization that they weren't just showing us things. They were changing us, piece by piece, and Sarah was the first. The moment Sarah's eyes turned black, reflecting that endless void, I felt the first surge of real panic tear through the paralysis, because it wasn't just her being changed. It was a mirror of what could happen to all of us, a glimpse of the future they might be forcing upon us. And though I struggled with every fiber of my being to move, to scream, to fight, I was still trapped, floating weightless in that endless chamber of shifting light, a prisoner of thought itself. Daniel managed to twist his head just enough to meet my eyes, and the sheer terror in his face told me he understood too. We were next. The beings circled closer, silent but overwhelming, and then, as though some unspoken decision had been reached, one of them broke from the formation and drifted directly toward me. Its presence was suffocating, like gravity itself had thickened, pressing into my chest, slowing my heartbeat until I thought it might stop. It raised its hand, long, shimmering, too perfect, and placed 2 fingers against my temple. The instant contact was made, everything vanished. I was no longer in the chamber, no longer with my friends. I stood barefoot on the cracked asphalt of that desert highway, alone under a sky without stars. My breathing echoed in the silence, sharp and shallow, and then a figure appeared on the horizon, walking toward me. At first I thought it was human, a tall man in a dark jacket, shoulders square, stride purposeful. But when he came close, I saw his face was mine. My own reflection, down to the scar on my chin from when I fell off a bike at 12. My double stopped just a few feet away and smiled, but it was wrong, a smile too calm, too practiced, and when he spoke, his voice was mine but layered, distorted, like dozens of whispers stacked together. You know why we chose you. I stumbled back, shaking my head, shouting that I didn't, that I never asked for this. But he kept advancing, his eyes black voids swallowing every trace of human warmth. You carry the map, he said, touching his chest, the same chest I had, the same heartbeat pounding inside me. And before I could ask what he meant, images flooded me again. Diagrams, symbols I couldn't read, yet somehow felt burned into my bones, coordinates stretching across starfields, leading not outward but inward, deeper into the earth itself. My double leaned closer, so close I could feel the cold of his not breath on my face, and whispered, "The key is inside you." I screamed, and the desert shattered like glass, fragments of sky and sand dissolving into light, and suddenly I was back in the chamber, gasping, my body convulsing like I'd been shocked. Daniel and Mia stared at me with wide, horrified eyes, and I realized they had watched me suspended in silence while something else happened inside my mind. Sarah drifted nearby, no longer trembling or afraid. She looked serene, radiant, as if she belonged to them now, her gaze fixed on me with something like pity. Chris was thrashing violently, fighting against the invisible force holding him, shouting that he wouldn't let them rewrite him. And in his rage, he actually broke free for a second, flailing toward one of the beings before being seized midair and held immobile, his face twisted in agony. They weren't torturing him, not physically, but his screams told me they were deep inside his head now, tearing at the foundations of his mind. And through it all, I felt the echo of those words, "The key is inside you," burning in the back of my skull like a brand. The being that touched me had shown me something personal, something they hadn't shared with the others, and I didn't know if it meant I was marked for something greater or doomed beyond saving. Chris's screams echoed until they suddenly stopped, cut off as though a switch had been thrown, and he hung limp in the air, breathing but unconscious, and I felt a surge of fury mixed with despair because whatever they were doing, we were powerless to resist. Daniel shouted at them, begging them to let us go, his voice cracking with a desperation I'd never heard before, but the beings didn't acknowledge him. Their focus was on me and Sarah, as if we were the ones they had been waiting for all along. Sarah drifted closer, her eyes still pools of black, her face calm in a way that made my stomach twist, and when she spoke, her voice wasn't entirely hers anymore. It was layered with that same echoing resonance I had heard in my own mind. "Don't fight it. They're not here to harm us. They're here to prepare us." I wanted to grab her, shake her, demand she snap out of it, but the invisible pressure pinned me in place, and when I tried to shout, the words stuck in my throat. One of the beings touched Daniel then, and his body stiffened as the visions took him, but when it was over he looked broken, hollow, his eyes wet with tears. He shook his head weakly at me, whispering, "Don't let them in," before his voice trailed into silence. And then it was my turn. The being placed its shimmering hand against my chest, and this time I didn't fall into some illusion of desert highways or reflections. I was pulled upward, beyond the chamber, beyond the planet itself, into a perspective so vast I thought my mind would collapse. I saw Earth hanging below me, small and fragile, wrapped in thin blue, surrounded by darkness. And around it, hidden in the void, were more of them, ships, spheres, structures that bent space around them, cloaked until they wanted to be seen. They were watching us, studying us, and yet there was something else, waiting. A voice filled my skull, not words but understanding, heavy and absolute. "Your world stands on the edge. You carry what is needed. You will remember when the time comes." The vision slammed into me like lightning, and suddenly I was back in the chamber, gasping, the pressure around my body lifting as if I'd been released. The beings began to withdraw, their forms dissolving into the same shifting light they had emerged from, and Sarah floated after them, smiling faintly, offering no resistance as she vanished into the beam. I screamed her name, but the light folded shut, the chamber collapsed in on itself, and in the blink of an eye we were back in the van, parked on the side of that desert road as if nothing had happened. The engine hummed quietly. The headlights glowed. Stars shone above us, silent and unchanged. But Sarah's seat was empty. Chris lay slumped, barely conscious, his face pale as chalk. Daniel clutched the steering wheel with white knuckles, staring straight ahead, his jaw locked. Mia was crying, whispering over and over, "It didn't happen, it didn't happen," as if she could erase it with repetition. None of us spoke about it on the drive back. None of us wanted to. But the silence was heavier than words. Weeks later, when I finally worked up the courage to check the footage from the camera, I found it corrupted, hours of static, broken fragments of sound. But in one short clip, just 3 seconds long, there was Sarah. Her face staring directly into the lens, her eyes still black, her lips moving silently. I played it again and again until I realized what she was saying, and my blood turned to ice. They're not gone. They're already here. That was the last time I watched the tape. I don't tell this story to convince you, or to make you believe in UFOs, or to entertain you with something unbelievable. I tell it because it happened, because I can still feel the weight of that hand against my chest when I close my eyes, and because every time I look up at the night sky now, I don't feel wonder, I feel watched.